The War That Never Ends, April 30th, 1974. Three Hells Angels walk into what they think is a drug deal in Florida. They never walk out. Their bodies, dumped in an Everglades quarry, spark a war that's still killing people today. 50 years, 3 continents, hundreds dead. 2 motorcycle clubs locked in the bloodiest rivalry in criminal history. The Outlaws versus the Hells Angels. A feud so vicious it makes cartel violence look civilized. Car bombs in parking lots. Executions at gas stations. Massacres at public events. This isn't random gang violence. It's organized warfare between criminal empires that refuse to die. The genesis of Giants, Illinois, 1935. The Great Depression has America by the throat, but in the industrial wasteland of McCook, something new is being born. The Outlaws Motorcycle Club emerges from the desperation of hard times, forged by men who've lost everything except their pride and their machines. These aren't weekend warriors playing dress-up. These are genuine outlaws, the 1%ers who reject society's rules and create their own laws. The skull and crossed pistons patch becomes their battle standard, worn by riders who consider themselves soldiers in a war against conformity. By the 1950s, they've carved out an empire stretching from the Midwest through the Southeast. Florida becomes their stronghold, a sun-soaked kingdom built on speed, violence, and absolute loyalty to the Brotherhood. Meanwhile, on the opposite coast, another legend is taking shape. California, 1948. World War II, veterans return home carrying more than combat ribbons. They bring tactical knowledge, weapons expertise, and a hunger for the adrenaline that civilian life can't satisfy. The Hells Angels rise from this post-war chaos like a phoenix of rebellion. The winged death's head, stolen from military squadron insignia, becomes their mark of infamy. They don't just want to ride, they want to conquer. And conquer they do, spreading across California like wildfire before setting their sights on the entire world. 2 unstoppable forces, both claiming the same prize, dominance over the outlaw motorcycle world. In the beginning, geography kept them apart. But as both clubs expanded, collision became inevitable. And when these titans finally met, the impact would shatter the criminal underworld forever. The point of no return. New Year's Eve, 1973. A party at the Hells Angels New York headquarters should have been a celebration. Instead, it became the spark that ignited a war still burning today. 3 outlaws from Florida attended as guests, expecting outlaw hospitality. What they received was a vicious beating that left them bloodied and humiliated. But this wasn't just an assault on 3 men. It was an attack on the outlaws' sacred honor. And in the world of outlaw motorcycle clubs, honor debts are always paid in blood. South Florida Outlaws leader James Big Jim Nolan received the news with cold fury. The beating of his brothers couldn't go unanswered, but his response wouldn't be another barroom brawl. It would be an execution that announced the Outlaws as players in a deadly game. April the 27th, 1974. 3 Hells Angels from the Lowell, Massachusetts chapter, George Whiskey, Hartman, Edwin Riverboat, Riley, and Albert Oskey Simmons receive an invitation they can't refuse. A drug deal in Fort Lauderdale promises easy money and new connections. Instead, they're driven to a remote quarry in the Florida Everglades, where bullets replace negotiations. 3 shots, 3 bodies dumped in a flooded rock pit, 3 lives sacrificed on the altar of outlaw vengeance. The message was unmistakable. The Outlaws weren't afraid of the Hells Angels' reputation. Ralph "Sonny" Barger, the legendary Angels leader, received news of the triple murder with the calculating coldness of a military commander. At a national meeting in Cleveland later that year, he declared total war. No negotiations, no mercy, no peace until the Outlaws were destroyed. The bloodshed had begun. Rivers of retribution. The Florida executions unleashed hell across America. Both clubs abandoned any pretense of being motorcycle enthusiasts and revealed themselves as what they truly were: criminal armies prepared for total war. The Outlaws transformed their clubhouses into fortresses. Cinder block walls replaced wooden frames. Gun ports appeared where windows once stood. Members trained with military precision, learning tactics that would make infantry units proud. The Hells Angels responded with coordinated strikes that demonstrated their global reach. Machine gun attacks on Outlaws headquarters erupted across multiple states simultaneously. Georgia, Florida, Ohio, all became battlegrounds where Angels members unleashed automatic weapons fire on club buildings like military assaults. But this wasn't warfare confined to clubhouses. Members became targets wherever they could be found. Gas stations turned into killing fields. Bars became execution sites. Home addresses were shared like intelligence briefings, and families became acceptable casualties in a conflict without rules. Car bombs became the weapon of choice. Remote detonated death that could strike without warning. The explosive that killed your rival today might have been planted weeks ago, ticking like a mechanical heart until the perfect moment for revenge. Drive-by shootings transformed quiet suburban streets into war zones. Members couldn't grab groceries or visit friends without scanning for threats, knowing that around any corner could be an enemy with a loaded weapon and generations of hatred in his heart. By the early 1980s, the body count was climbing on both sides like a macabre scoreboard. Each death demanded retaliation. Each retaliation sparked further revenge. The Outlaws and Hells Angels had created a perpetual motion machine of violence that fed on its own momentum. Blood across borders. As both clubs expanded internationally, their war metastasized like cancer, spreading to innocent countries that became collateral damage in an American conflict. Canada became the first international battlefield. The Outlaws established footholds through strategic alliances with local clubs like Satan's Choice in Ontario. When several Satan's Choice chapters patched over in 1977, the Outlaws suddenly controlled methamphetamine trafficking routes across the Detroit-Windsor border, a narcotic pipeline worth millions. The Hells Angels countered by absorbing the Outlaws Motorcycle Club in Quebec, giving them control of Montreal's drug distribution networks and access to international shipping routes. Two criminal empires now faced each other across the longest undefended border in the world. The stage was set for the rivalry to explode beyond American borders. While the major Quebec biker war would primarily involve the Angels battling the Rock Machine, the underlying Outlaws-Angels hatred simmered beneath every alliance and influenced every territorial decision. Canadian law enforcement found themselves managing an imported war they never asked for, watching American criminal organizations tear apart their communities in pursuit of old vengeances and new profits. The conflict's international expansion meant that what began as a regional American feud had become a global threat, requiring cooperation between law enforcement agencies that had never needed to communicate before. The art of annihilation. The Outlaws and Hells Angels didn't just fight. They revolutionized criminal warfare. Their tactics evolved beyond simple gang violence into sophisticated military operations that law enforcement struggled to comprehend. Yves Apache Trudeau became the Angels' most terrifying weapon during the Quebec conflicts, a contract killer who turned murder into science. 40 confirmed kills earned him a reputation that crossed international borders. His weapon of choice revealed the calculated nature of the violence, remotely detonated car bombs that could strike with surgical precision while allowing the assassin to escape undetected. Both clubs developed intelligence networks that rivaled government agencies. They infiltrated rival chapters through carefully planted spies. They recruited informants within support clubs and monitored law enforcement communications. Members were trained to identify undercover officers through behavioral analysis and background verification. Counter-surveillance became an art form. Members learned to detect electronic monitoring, identify unmarked police vehicles, and recognize surveillance patterns. Clubhouses were swept for bugs with professional-grade equipment. Communications were coded to frustrate wiretaps. Motorcycle runs and public events transformed into tactical operations. What appeared to be social gatherings were actually reconnaissance missions designed to test enemy responses or lure rivals into predetermined kill zones. Members were dispatched across state lines for missions that ensured local law enforcement would face jurisdictional obstacles before making arrests. The sophistication of their operations forced law enforcement agencies to completely reimagine how they approached organized crime, Traditional police work wasn't sufficient against organizations that operated with military discipline and international reach. London's Bloody Sunday, January 31st, 1998. The Battersea Arts Centre in London hosts the annual Rockers Reunion, what should have been a celebration of British motorcycle culture. Instead, it becomes the stage for one of the most shocking displays of violence in European criminal history. The UK biker scene had been drawing battle lines between clubs aligned with either the Outlaws or Hells Angels. Local tensions had been building for months, but what happened at Battersea exceeded everyone's worst fears. 40 Hells Angels from chapters across England arrived like an invasion force. Axes, hammers, knives, baseball bats, and machetes. A medieval arsenal for modern warfare. Radio headsets coordinated their movements with military precision. The target? Members of the Outcasts MC, a club closely allied with the Outlaws in their global power struggle. What followed wasn't a fight, it was a massacre executed in front of horrified civilians. David Flipper Armstrong was beaten to death in the street, his body broken by multiple weapons while bystanders watched in terror. Malcolm Street Clare suffered 8 stab wounds before bleeding to death near the Lavender Hill police station, his life ebbing away on public pavement. Dozens more were injured, some critically in violence that witnesses described as a coordinated execution designed to send an unmistakable message about Hells Angels' dominance. The Battersea bloodshed shattered any illusion that the American biker war was contained by geography. The rivalry had metastasized across the Atlantic, capable of erupting anywhere with lethal consequences. British authorities responded with increased surveillance and stricter laws, but the damage was done. The world now understood that the Outlaws' Hells Angels conflict recognized no borders and respected no innocent bystanders. Empire of Fear. By the dawn of the new millennium, both clubs had evolved from regional gangs into global criminal empires whose rivalry spanned continents and threatened international security. The Hells Angels expanded aggressively across Europe, establishing chapters through strategic absorption of local clubs. Germany, Denmark, Sweden, Netherlands. Each expansion brought them closer to controlling the continent's most lucrative drug trafficking routes. The Outlaws responded by solidifying their own European presence, particularly in Belgium, England, and Scandinavia. Every new chapter meant another potential flashpoint where ancient American hatred could explode into European violence. In Germany, both clubs were linked to large-scale methamphetamine and cocaine trafficking operations that generated millions in profits. Ports became battlegrounds for smuggling routes. Urban territories were carved up like medieval kingdoms, each defended with deadly force. Scandinavian conflicts grew so intense that Denmark introduced some of Europe's toughest anti-gang legislation. The ability to ban clubhouses in urban areas was just one tool in an expanded legal arsenal designed to contain violence that threatened public safety. Australia became another theater of conflict as the rivalry took on new life in the Southern Hemisphere. Drive-by shootings and firebombings drew the attention of specialized anti-bikie task forces, but the violence continued to escalate. The international expansion meant law enforcement agencies across the globe found themselves managing fallout from an American feud they had no role in creating. Intelligence sharing became essential as both clubs operated with coordination that transcended national boundaries. Hunting the hunters, the global reach and military sophistication of both clubs forced law enforcement to develop entirely new approaches to organized crime investigation. Operation Black Biscuit became the ATF's most ambitious infiltration attempt against the Hells Angels. For months, undercover agents posed as rival bikers, attending events and building relationships that provided unprecedented access to the organization's inner workings. The operation revealed the true scope of Angels' criminal activity: drug trafficking, weapons dealing, violent enforcement, but also demonstrated the extraordinary risks of deep undercover work against organizations designed to detect and eliminate threats. Legal challenges emerged around evidence contamination, entrapment defenses, and the ethical boundaries of undercover participation in criminal activity. Several cases collapsed before trial, teaching law enforcement that traditional infiltration tactics were insufficient against sophisticated criminal organizations. The Outlaws faced their own federal attention through Operation Motorhead, a multi-agency initiative that resulted in massive seizures of drugs, weapons, and cash. But for every chapter shut down, another seemed to emerge elsewhere, demonstrating the resilience of organizations built for survival. In Canada, integrated biker enforcement units combined federal, provincial, and local officers in coordinated campaigns specifically designed to counter outlaw motorcycle gangs. Both clubs were priority targets, but their adaptation to enforcement pressure proved remarkably effective. European authorities developed joint task forces through Europol, sharing intelligence and coordinating operations across national boundaries. German police conducted sweeping raids, Danish authorities banned clubhouses, Swedish officers restricted recruitment. But the clubs continued to adapt and survive. War in the digital age. The 21st century brought new weapons to an old war, as both clubs adapted their ancient rivalry to modern realities. Large-scale public battles became less frequent, but targeted violence continued to make headlines. Knife attacks in the UK, drive-by shootings in Australia, brutal assaults connected to ongoing territorial disputes. The violence had gone underground but never disappeared. Federal authorities in the United States continued listing both clubs as active participants in organized crime. ATF classifications identify them as significant criminal enterprises involved in methamphetamine production, weapons trafficking, and violent intimidation. Intelligence reports suggested the rivalry had shifted toward controlling profitable drug and weapons routes rather than public displays of dominance. The war had evolved from street battles to corporate boardroom strategies, but the underlying hatred remained unchanged. Law enforcement adapted with advanced surveillance technology, cell site simulators, encrypted messaging infiltration, financial tracking systems that could follow money across international boundaries. Civil asset forfeiture allowed authorities to seize clubhouses and disrupt organizational infrastructure. But neither organization showed signs of surrender. Each continued attracting new recruits drawn by the allure of outlaw brotherhood, the legendary lifestyle, and the infamous rivalry itself. For many young men, joining meant becoming part of a mythic conflict that stretched back decades. Symbols of eternal war. At the heart of the endless conflict lies something more powerful than territory or money: identity forged in violence and hatred. The Outlaws' motto, "God forgives, outlaws don't," isn't just words. It's a promise of eternal vengeance. Their acronym, ADIOS, Angels Die in Outlaw States, serves as both rallying cry and death threat, displayed on patches that mark the wearer as a soldier in an undying war. The Hells Angels counter with their own declarations. When we do right, nobody remembers. When we do wrong, nobody forgets. And the cryptic AFFA, Angels Forever, Forever Angels. Promises of loyalty that transcend death itself. These mottos appear on patches, tattoos, graffiti, and gravestones. They're constant reminders that club loyalty supersedes every other relationship: family, career, even personal survival. For rivals, they're warnings that violence is always on the table. Clubhouses become shrines to the conflict, decorated with trophies from past battles. Rival patches taken as war spoils. Newspaper clippings documenting violent victories. Shell casings from notorious shootouts. Each artifact reinforces the mythology that keeps the war alive. Stories of legendary battles are retold to new recruits like religious texts, embedding the rivalry into their identity from the moment they join. The feud becomes part of their DNA, passed down through generations like a genetic curse. This cultural foundation makes peace impossible. In the outlaw world, reputation is everything, and backing down means extinction. The Outlaws and Hells Angels would rather die fighting than live surrendering. The curse that cannot die. Nearly 50 years after the Florida executions, the Outlaws' Hells Angels rivalry endures through forces that seem almost supernatural in their power. Loyalty remains absolute. Members swear lifelong oaths that treat betrayal as the ultimate sin. This unbreakable commitment means grudges transcend individual lifetimes. Hatred becomes hereditary, passed from one generation to the next, like a family heirloom soaked in blood. Territory drives everything. In the motorcycle world, Patches represent more than membership. They're claims to specific geographic areas that must be defended at any cost. Losing ground to rivals means public humiliation that can destroy a club's global reputation. The mythology has taken on a life of its own. Decades of books, documentaries, news coverage, and criminal folklore have transformed this feud into legend. New recruits aren't just joining motorcycle clubs. They're becoming part of an epic story written in violence and vengeance. This combination creates a self-sustaining cycle that feeds on its own energy. The war justifies the identity demands the war, and both become more important than any individual member or generation of leadership. As long as men are drawn to outlaw brotherhood, legendary conflict, and the promise of immortality through violence, the Outlaws and Hell's Angels will remain locked in their eternal battle. Blood that never dries. From the Everglades executions to the Battersea Massacre, from Canadian border wars to Australian suburban battlefields, the Outlaws and Hell's Angels have written their rivalry in blood across 3 continents and 5 decades. Law enforcement has spent billions trying to contain violence that recognizes no borders and respects no innocence. Yet both organizations endure, adapt, and continue attracting new soldiers to an ancient war. This isn't just criminal history. It's a study in how hatred can become institutionalized, passed down through generations like a sacred trust. How identity forged in violence can outlast any individual member or leader. How organizations built on loyalty and vengeance can survive every attempt to destroy them. The patches still fly. The territory still matters. The blood still flows. And somewhere tonight, in a clubhouse decorated with trophies from past battles, new recruits are learning the stories that will compel them to kill or die for a rivalry they inherited but didn't create. The war that began with a New Year's Eve beating shows no signs of ending. In the world of outlaw motorcycle clubs, some feuds are too deep, too personal, and too profitable to ever truly die. The skulls continue staring across their battlefield, waiting for the next chapter in a story written in violence and destined to continue until the last patch is torn from the last jacket of the last man willing to die for colors that have claimed more lives than some small wars. This is the legacy of America's bloodiest rivalry, a conflict that began with brotherhood and became something far darker, something that may outlast every attempt to end it.